Chainsaw Man Chapter 165 gives us one of our most depressing chapters of Chainsaw Man Part 2, while also making you once again look at Fami and go, yes, she's definitely up to something. Because when someone like Denji is able to put two and two together and see that you're lying about something, then you have clearly messed up big time, because he's not the sharpest knife in the drawer. And after one conversation with Fami and Mitaka, this guy is already poking holes into Fami's story that he told to Mitaka. We open up the chapter with Denji discovering a dead body and asking the quiet part out loud. Why is there a dead body there in the train station? But in typical Denji fashion, he just totally ignores the chainsaw in the guy's head. But given everything that has happened over the last few weeks, he obviously knows about the situation with the people transforming into Chainsaw Man. But we quickly see how society has adjusted to this problem of random people popping up with chainsaws on their heads, because we're told, don't worry about it. The attendants, they'll come and they'll just clean it all up. And it just goes to show you that for as crazy as the world can get at times, it doesn't stop for anyone or anything. And most importantly, the world, it eventually just adjusts to everything that's going on as it goes into madness. What might seem like chaos today with all these people spouting chainsaws on their heads, when you give it a few weeks, it's just accepted as being the new normal. And the narrative uses Mitaka to break that down for us, saying that this is just expected at this point. We then shift over to Denji and company, and they're riding on the train, and this has got to be the most random collection of people you'd ever expect to see sitting there discussing current events with each other. In particular, as readers, we know the history with these characters, including most notably Denji and Katana Man, as well as the complicated relationship with Denji and Mitaka. Fami, she starts giving out suggestions about places that they can go to for sushi, and what's interesting here is the first restaurant that she names, she says, hey, yeah, the chef, he died. The next restaurant, she says, well, it tasted pretty good, but I burnt the whole place down. And that just conveniently leaves the last restaurant that they go to, and this whole time Denji has this derpy expression on his face, because even he knows that something isn't right, and he just cuts right to the chase here. He looks over to Mitaka and he says, why is it that you want to fight me as Chainsaw Man? What do you get out of it? And oh boy, this is where it gets very interesting here, because Mitaka tells Denji it's her plan to save Denji, and when he has that confused look, she tells Fami, hey, back me up, explain everything. But right here, we start seeing signs of the naive nature of Mitaka at play here, and it's a great callback to what we saw in Chapter 1 of Part 2 of Chainsaw Man. Mitaka, she came off as being gloomy and a bit socially aloof, but when it came to her dying, she made the deal that she did with Yoru to give her her body, and ever since, her world, it hasn't been the same, but she's been a naive little sheep surrounded by wolves in sheep clothing the entire time, from Yoru, arguably Nayuta, and especially Fami. And the worst part about it, she doesn't see it, and she views Fami as being an ally, which you have to believe at some point nature's going to take over and Mitaka's going to get screwed. This leads to Fami explaining to Denji what we as the audience know, what I clarified to one of you guys in the comment section in the last review. Red Chainsaw Man and Black Chainsaw Man, they are Denji and Pochita. Yoru and Mitaka were each after a Chainsaw Man, but for different reasons. Fami finally breaks it down in a way to where anyone who might still be confused will be able to grasp it. She says that his heart is what makes him Chainsaw Man, and that it's because of the contract he made with Pochita. The contract in itself requires him to live a normal life, but if he ever breaks that contract, Pochita will emerge. This will allow them to kill the real Chainsaw Man and then transplant a human heart in a Denji's body to keep him alive, which will in turn make him into a normal human yet again. Logically, what she's saying, it works depending on how fast everything's done, in particular transplanting a human heart into Denji. But this is where Fami earned the side eye from Denji. He might be stupid, but even someone like him is going to be able to catch on to the lie if you speak it too much and with too much conviction. And that's where we see the difference between Fami and Makima. So Makima, when she spoke, it was more in a measured way, but she also hid her cards behind all the gaslighting and seduction of Denji. She had his mind think about everything except for true motives. She was in a position of power, very fitting because she was the control devil, which is why you would see the scenes of her having Denji grab onto her breast and her using other methods to seduce him. That's why it was so important. It blinded him. Fami, she isn't Makima at all. She's not as hot as Makima, and she doesn't pretend to even be as hot as Makima, and she refuses to answer answer when Denji asks how did she know all the details of the devil contract that should be confidential, which at this point in the story itself, we as the audience know enough to deduce that Nayuta likely told her at some point, because Nayuta read Denji's memories when she tried to learn about her previous reincarnation, better known as Makima. When Mitaka tells Denji to just trust Fami, and Fami is really out to rescue Denji, we basically see that old Star Wars prequel meme and where you see Anakin and Padme sitting in this field of flowers, and he says one thing and then she asks him a question, and then she follows it up again with the same question in a more serious manner. In this case, it's Mitaka asking Fami if her heart is in the right place after she says that Fami is just trying to make up for doing all the bad things by helping Denji, and this girl is as silent as can be. She's pleading the fifth, and I absolutely fell on the floor laughing when I got to this point in the story, basically saying repeatedly that Fami ain't shit, because that was as obvious as it gets that something's up with Fami. Now, this is where it does get depressing. Denji tells Mitaka pretty much, hey, why do you think I even want to go back to living a normal life? And this is where we get the sad violin music starting to play. Denji says that he remembers having to eat toilet paper from the public restroom in order to survive, in particular the public restroom at a park. Next time you go into like a gas station or, as Denji said, public restroom at a park, just pay attention to how disgusting it looks. At least in my experience, the bathrooms are not the cleanest. When Mitaka hears this, you can see it on her face. She is stunned by this, and her eyes, they are drawn looking down, unable to even look at Denji fully, because you can see the naive side of her starting to come out and not realizing that Denji had it this bad. That line where Denji says, once I stopped going hungry, I became unable to ever eat toilet paper again. That is a deep insight into human nature, and it says a lot in terms of how Fujimoto is writing Denji's character. When we're at our lowest and we've had to do the most unthinkable things to get by, it's hard to ever go back to it, especially when we've seen another side to life and we've lived it for an extended period of time. On a personal level, I get exactly where Denji's coming from here. As someone who grew up with a mom trying to feed a house of four on a bank teller's salary, making US federal minimum wage back in the 1990s, I can remember eating some rather questionable things that I don't ever want to go back to eating if I can help it. It's part of why I work so hard now, uploading on multiple channels and grinding, because I am scared of ever having to go back to those days where food, it was questionable. I didn't want to know what the ingredients were, and the only way that we had heat in the house was because we were burning stuff in the fireplace because there wasn't any gas in the propane tank in that old country house I grew up in. Denji has had a chance to eat all kinds of foods, and he's had the security and he's had the luxury of living a somewhat normal life afforded to him by being Chainsaw Man. The idea of going back to eat toilet paper is something that he can't ever think about ever again. Hell, when we first meet him in chapter 1 of the series, the guy, he's selling parts of his body for money. He's keeping a running tab of it. He's eating used cigarette butts for cash. He doesn't ever want to go back to that lifestyle. Being Chainsaw Man, it has a bunch of downs. Losing power and Aki, getting betrayed by Makima, but it's had a lot of ups as well too. Enough so, he isn't trying to go back to his old way of living, especially if he ever finds Nayuta and he continues to be responsible for her, because he doesn't ever want her to live that life, and Mitaka, she doesn't get it. It just goes to show that some people, when they have privilege, they don't understand it until they lose it. She's dead set on giving Denji back his old life, his normal life, yet the way that she's drawn, unable to even look at him and looking down at her feet as she says no matter what, it does make you wonder if on some level she does know in her heart that she's being a bit selfish, wanting to save Denji for saving her, even at the cost of sending him back to a life that he hates. The development of what this adds for Mitaka's character is something that we have to keep our eyes on, because it is continuing to build on the split between herself and Fami and Yoru. This leads us to Katana Man saying, look, killing Chainsaw Man is not going to bring my grandfather back, and he be turning in his grave listening to Denji cry like a little bitch. And when Mitaka, being the stickler for the rules that she is, says that there's no smoking on the train, Katana Man, he just picks violence because he knows that Mitaka has feelings for Denji. It is obvious to anyone with eyes. So the guy basically says, screw the sushi bar. Let's just take this dude to a brothel because nothing makes a man happier than having sex with a hot woman. That, my friends, might be the one thing that gets Denji out the funk that he's in, because the memes of Denji being horny, they exist for a reason. Even if we can dive deeper into his character and say that him becoming a more sex-crazed person at the end of part 1 and early part 2 just comes from him not dealing with the trauma from part 1 that he underwent, because when people are hurting, they tend to turn to familiar things. I love that Fujimoto chose to go here with Denji's character and use Mitaka as a way to remind us as readers what a normal life, a life where he doesn't have the option to turn into Chainsaw Man, it truly means for Denji. And this is easily one of the most humanizing experiences for the character, because even with that agreement with Yoshida, he still had a choice in the matter. He could choose to transform or not. In this case, the choice be taken away. Between that and Fami showing that she's no Makima, this was a really good chapter. Wish to see a more in-depth breakdown on the Denji and Makima relationship? You'll need to click on this video on the right.